right, Tina, why don't you kick us off?
All right. And nice. Hello, good to see you all here. And I need to welcome you all to this, to our, get back to where I was. Thank you. There we go. Thank you all for being here and welcome. We are glad that you're here. We will be recording, and so you've probably already clicked that little got it message. There will be a chance for us to share our kind of get to know each other at the end and have some announcements and get to know each other. But until then, we ask that you keep yourself muted. And I'm sorry that you, yes, keep yourself muted. We are also asking that we will, today's program will have 3 presentations and we'll have a short question and answer period at the end. And so when you can feel free to put your questions in the chat. If you can put them in all caps, that'll help us to make sure that we see them. We can see the questions. And until then, we are on behalf of Divest Philly and the War Machine Coalition, and the co-sponsoring groups, which is World Beyond War, CODEPINK, Green Party PA, Peace Action, and the Greater Philadelphia branch of WILPF. I have the pleasure of welcoming all of you to this webinar. Divest Philly is itself a coalition of organizations and people who want to change the world and create a better one. If you need to contact the host, or if you're having technical issues, hover your mouse or finger over the bottom of the screen to reach the participant list, and then you can click on that and host will be at the top of the page. Please direct the technical questions to Greta Zarro, and you'll see her name with host next to it. I said that. So we recognize and acknowledge the Greater Philadelphia area stands on the indigenous territory known as Lenape-Hoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenape, also called Lenape, are Delaware Indians. These are the people who during the 1680s negotiated with William Penn to facilitate the founding of the colony of Pennsylvania. Their descendants today include the Delaware tribe, and we are the Delaware tribe and the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, among others. And this photo is a statue that is commissioned by the Lenape and a civic organization in Philadelphia, and it is titled Tamanin. We know that we have visitors from elsewhere today, and we welcome you to acknowledge the land and the people that came before colonialism. As we welcome our next speaker, please take a moment to take a breath. We have all joined this call today in an act of hope and resistance. We appreciate you being here. Cherrill Spencer is a retired experimental physicist who was born and educated in England and has lived in Palo Alto, California since 1974. She joined WILPF in 2012 to work against war and for disarmament. She is a member of the Peninsula and Palo Alto branch of WILPF, and through which she works on CEDAW, nuclear disarmament, and the Poor People's Campaign. Spencer has led major projects for WILPF and is currently co-chairing the Disarm End Wars Issue Committee, where she's leading the education about the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. She recently chaired a session she organized at a major conference of physicists on the dangers from radioactive waste resulting from the production of nuclear weapons at sites across the United States. Thanks to the technology of Zoom, we're very pleased that she can join us this evening or afternoon. Cherrill, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tina, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm talking to you from sunny and drought-ridden California, and Tina is going to share my slides any moment now. I will be giving you an introduction to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which we call TPNW for short. And this is a very brief summary of things about the TPNW, which I've written specifically for this meeting. And you should appreciate it's a very complicated, there's a complicated story and lots of things going on. And so this is just a summary to kind of introduce you to the TPNW. Next slide, please. So first, I'm going to tell you what is an international treaty and how do we adopt them here in the US. And so there's the definition at the top. I'll read it in case you're not familiar with this concept. An international treaty is a binding formal agreement, contract, or other written instrument that establishes obligations between two or more subjects of international law. Treaties are primarily made between what the United Nations calls states, which you must always remember means countries or sovereign nations. And the key distinguishing feature of a treaty is that it is binding on the people who have agreed to it. Usually, treaties are introduced nowadays, usually through the United Nations, and then a country can sign it by some kind of senior official, and that will show that country's intention to be bound by the treaty. That's not the end of the story. Here in the US, it is the US Senate that actually ratifies treaties. And so, it's called making its advice and consent to treaty ratifications. And you need a 2/3 majority in our Senate to ratify a treaty. So we have many treaties that are languishing unratified by the US. The one that grieves me almost as much as the TPNW is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which has been ratified by like 190 nations, and there's just 3 of us that haven't ratified CEDAW yet. Next slide, please. So why are we so worried about nuclear weapons in particular? So we consider human rights first. And I'm waiting for Tina to give me the next slide. So there is an article of an international covenant on civil and political rights. And so Tina, can you get to the next one? I hope I'm not frozen. Can somebody tell me if you can hear me?
Yeah, you're fine, Cheryl.
Okay.
Greta, did you pause my screen sharing?
No.
Nope, you're screen sharing.
So anyway, this international covenant on civil and political rights says that every human being has an inherent right to life. And this right shall be protected by law, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. So there is a Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, and they studied this international covenant and concluded that the threat or the use of nuclear weapons violates the right to life. And notice that it is not just the use of nuclear weapons, but threatening to use nuclear weapons violates everyone on the planet's right to life. And your next slide is still not showing, Tina.
All right, let me try again. Sorry.
So
you can try using your left and right arrow keys, Tina.
Okay, so the war, believe it or not, is carried out under some international laws. And so the US has incorporated the international rules of law into its own law. And so the US is already violating that rule, because it is never been legal to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons. So many people in other parts of the world who don't own nuclear weapons, remember there are 9 countries that do have nuclear weapons, they were very concerned about this growing threat that nuclear weapons pose to human survival, pose a threat to the environment, to socioeconomic development, to the global economy, to food security, and to the health and welfare of current and future generations. And this threat, has enlarged since 1945, when the bombs were set off against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And one of the things that has been realized is that nuclear weapons actually have a disproportionate impact on women and girls and on indigenous people around the world. And can you not catch up with me, Tina?
Oh my goodness. I thought I was. You're not seeing it?
No, why don't you try again, Tina?
Okay.
So I'm on slide 4 now.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
This is it. Okay, thank you. So let
Sorry,
me just give you a bit of history about this treaty. Okay, so there was actually a decade of work leading up to this date, the 7th of July 2017. And this was work by what's called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And it has many partners who worked on this decade of advocacy, and WILPF is one of its many partners. So they actually got, on that 7th of July 2017, 122 nations agreed that there should be a treaty about prohibiting nuclear weapons. It was open for signature on the 20th of September 2017. Remember, I mentioned the concept of a senior official signing a treaty, but then all these countries who had signed it had to go away and persuade their government to ratify it by whatever means their government laws say. As I said here, it's the Senate that has to ratify treaties. And the 50th country ratified in October 2020, that was Honduras. And the treaty itself said 90 days after that, it would come into force. So that was the 22nd of January 2021. The treaty entered into force for those countries that had ratified it. So those countries were not allowed to own and use nuclear weapons. And the text of the treaty is down there at the bottom. Okay, and in the chat, I hope you will start to see these URLs are going to be posted in the chat for your later looking at them. Next slide, please, Tina. So what does the TPNW actually prohibit? Okay, and it's a prohibition that we hope will lead to their total elimination. Okay, it has 20 articles, and the first article is the most important one. It lists the actual prohibitions covered by the treaty, and you can see them there on your screen. Developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, transferring, possessing, stockpiling, using or threatening to use nuclear weapons, or allowing nuclear weapons to be stationed on their territory. And it also prohibits countries from assisting, encouraging, or inducing anyone, not just countries, to engage in any of those activities. And I'm very proud to say that as of 6 days ago, we now have 60 countries who have ratified the TPNW, and that URL there will give you the list. And the next slide, please, shows you the world map showing which countries have ratified the TPNW, and they're colored in dark green. And you'll notice there's a preponderance of the ones towards the southern part of the hemisphere. And you might say, well, that's not much area, but in fact, some of these countries have a lot of population. So the populace, so there is a large fraction of the world's population who've said they don't want nuclear weapons and they're not going to allow them on their territory. Next slide, please. So this worry about human rights and nuclear weapons. Now you might say, well, you know, we just dropped the bombs on 2 countries in Japan. But in fact, there's been a lot going on since then. And this slide explains who's already been subjected to the awful effects of nuclear weapons. And they're mostly indigenous people, and they were subjected to nuclear tests, nuclear bombs set off in the atmosphere from the 1940s to the 1970s. The Marshallese people in the Pacific Ocean had their islands taken over. They were evacuated off them. You've probably heard of the Bikini Atoll, and 67 bombs were exploded over those islands over 12 years, amounting to 108 megatons. And that was as if 1.6 Hiroshima-sized bombs were exploded every day during that time. So now it's 60 years later, the Marshallese have been allowed back onto some of these islands, but they cannot farm their previously fertile islands because of the radioactivity of the soil. They're obliged to import most of their food, and that food tends to be processed and canned, which we know isn't so good as fresh food. In Australia, there was an Aboriginal people who were displaced from their land before the tests run by the British, but they're nomadic people, and the people in charge of the testing didn't realize that they hadn't found them all, and so some of them were still in the area and were subjected to fallout. So those are the people who've already had their human rights trampled. Next slide, please. So a distinguishing article of the TPNW, which distinguishes it from other treaties to deal with nuclear weapons, is this Article 6 called Victim Assistance and Environmental Remediation. And so people who've ratified it are supposed to help other people who have suffering or have suffered from nuclear weapons being set off. And this remains to be seen exactly how it will happen, but it is an emphasis on the humanitarian aspects of nuclear weapons. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is still in force, doesn't say anything about helping people who've suffered from nuclear weapons. And you can suffer just from the mining. You don't actually have to suffer from one being set off. And then the New START Treaty, you've probably heard of those. Neither of those deal with helping the victims of nuclear weapons. So next slide, please. So how will it be implemented by those countries who've ratified it? Well, Ireland is a good example. It's been working against nuclear weapons and for disarmament for decades. So Article 5 of the treaty, and there are only 20 articles, say that each party will take appropriate legal, administrative, and other measures, including imposition of penal sanctions, to prevent and suppress any activity prohibited to a state party. So what the Republic of Ireland has done, they have enacted a law called the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Law in 2019, even before the thing came into effect. It's now on their books. There's a URL there that you can go look at it. And they define the offenses and the penalties in their domestic laws. So if anybody in Ireland, tries to support a Lockheed Martin, for example, were to invite Lockheed Martin to open a factory in Ireland, and where they might be doing something with nuclear weapons, would be deemed to have had a felony, and they would be penalized by a fine, or could actually be sent to jail. So this is the kind of thing that each country has to do. They have to put into their own domestic law, how are they going to deal with people who are transgressing against the TPNW. Next slide, please. So why, besides the fact that a bomb might be let off near you, why should you care about them? Well, this graphic shows you how much money is being spent on nuclear weapons. This is the 2020 numbers, every minute. Okay, on the left-hand side, $70,881 of your taxes are being spent on nuclear weapons in the US every minute. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the number $27.7 billion was given to 12 US defense companies to make and design nuclear weapons. And this is what the speakers after me are going to be talking about. They're going to be telling you what we should be doing to divest ourselves from these 12 US companies who are making obscene amounts of money from nuclear weapons. And you can
Cherrill?
see, yes, 2
Sorry,
minutes.
didn't mean to interrupt. You have a minute and a half left.
Okay, so next slide, please. And so we're all being terribly worried about the invasion of Ukraine and Putin's veiled threat to use nuclear weapons. So he said he was raising the level of readiness of his nuclear forces. We have people studying satellite photos, and they can say that they were already on high alert. Russia already has 1,200 warheads on its ICBMs, but they can't see them moving any mobile launchers or anything like that. So you probably don't need to be as worried as you thought you needed to be about Russia using nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, this threat does undermine the NPT. Non-weapons countries may say, well, maybe we should have nuclear weapons because that will be a deterrent against somebody invading us. Next slide, please. So how are we going to, no, okay, sorry, am I done? So the, generally speaking, when you prohibit an awful weapon, it eventually does get prohibited all over the world. Chemical weapons, biological weapons are no longer allowed anywhere. And so we're hoping that as time goes on, the nuclear weapons will become a pariah also. And we have to pressure our politicians to deal with this. And you'll see at the bottom the address of my committee with WILPF that is working to try to get our congressional reps to agree that the TPNW is a good idea. So very last slide, please. So the 60 countries who've actually already ratified the treaty will be meeting in Vienna in June, and they will be working out how to implement some of the logistics that the treaty doesn't say all the details, so details have to be worked out. What you should know is the US government is bullying Germany and Norway not to attend. They want to attend as observers. They're not ratifiers. And so we have to tell our government not to be bullying Germany and Norway. And so we must build a worldwide civil society movement to support this very important treaty, and WILPF welcomes your participation in our projects. Would you please write to me and my co-chairs at that address at the bottom? Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Cherrill. So Cherrill has kind of kicked us off with this wider look at the international scope. And now my colleague Shea and I will hone in a little bit and talk about a national perspective from the Divest from the War Machine Coalition perspective and how we're working on these issues. So again, thank you all for being here. My name is Greta Zarro. I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War, and I'm pleased to be co-presenting with Shea, who I work with very closely from CODEPINK. And both World Beyond War and CODEPINK are two of the members of the Divest Philly from the War Machine Coalition. We have been working with Divest Philly for several years, and more broadly, we are founding members of the National Divest from the War Machine Coalition. We work with activists and organizations around the country and around the world to support the creation of city-specific divest coalitions like the one here in Philly. And for our presentation today, Shea and I will be providing some broader context about the National Divest Coalition, case studies from other divestment campaigns across the country, and various tools and resources that you can use to start divestment campaigns in your communities to divest from nuclear weapons and more broadly from the war machine. I'll pass it over to Shea next.
Thank you so much, Greta. And just to make sure, can you all see the big pink screen that says Divest from War? Is that looking good? Great, thank you so much. All right, so it's really nice to meet you all. My name is Shea. I am the Divest from the War Machine organizer with CODEPINK, as Greta was saying. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our coalition. The Divest from the War Machine Coalition kicked off in 2017 with a summit in Washington, D.C. that brought together policy experts, organizers, and activists to discuss how we can promote divestment as a tactic to dismantle the war economy and chip away at war profiteering. The coalition currently has over 70 member organizations, which span from local grassroots groups to national and international think tanks and NGOs. The coalition website, which is divestfromwarmachine.org, houses a robust set of tools and resources, as well as a listing of current campaigns and organizations around the world that are working on divestment. Is this me or Greta, is this you?
I can step in here, thanks. So yeah, what are we even talking about when we use this term, the war machine? This is a great graphic created by CODEPINK that really illustrates the mechanisms and the institutions that we're talking about today. We're talking about a self-perpetuating cycle where weapons manufacturers are using their profits to fund politicians' campaigns. Then those politicians vote for war and increase the Pentagon budget year after year, fueling the profits of those same weapons corporations. And underlying all of this is the fact that financial institutions and asset management companies invest heavily in weapons manufacturers and military contractors, boosting their profits and keeping this cycle going. And we can see this cycle playing out right now with the crisis in Ukraine, where as the conflict has escalated, we've been seeing weapons companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, we're seeing their stocks soaring, and this is a huge boon for them. And so I think that really illustrates this cycle of the war machine. Next slide. So war profiteering is largely normalized today, and foreign policy can feel like something that's very far off. Wars can seem like something that's happening halfway across the globe. And so what divestment does is it makes the war machine more concrete by showing its pervasiveness at nearly every level of institution in our daily lives. On a concrete level, the tactic of divestment means to withdraw investments from weapons corporations, military contractors, fossil fuel companies, private prisons, and any other type of extractive industry. And this can be done at so many different levels, whether you're looking at your personal banking practices and changing where you bank and where you put your funds, or looking at the institutional level, such as university endowments, and then scaling up from there, looking at city funds, pension funds, state pension funds, etc. A common argument against divestment is the fact that when an individual or an asset management company sells its stock, someone else will immediately buy it back. And while it's true that one single act of divestment in and of itself will not impact share prices, that argument misses the point. The power of divestment is that it exposes the weapon industry's influence on our politics and on our society. It makes visible the invisible war machine, and it seeks to stigmatize the companies that are complicit in it and the ways that our institutions and cities are complicit in this process, which then causes indirect economic consequences through that stigmatization. And so as we scale up divestment in city after city, we can make visible the war machine, and we can slowly chip away at the profits of weapons corporations. Next slide. And more broadly, this campaign is really about a radical reimagination of American priorities. Revoking the power of those who profit from war making is the first step in transforming our nation's foreign policy and ending the spread of violence, oppression, and death, both at home and abroad. As citizens, it's about saying that when our cities invest our taxpayer dollars into weapons companies, that is a direct contradiction to what should be a city's primary role of protecting the health and well-being of its residents. Instead, we want our tax dollars to go to life-affirming sectors like clean energy, education, healthcare, and so much more. Next slide. And I'll pass it to you, Shea.
Thank you so much, Greta. So what I love, especially a lot about divestment, is that it can happen at multiple levels. The campaign can be tailored to nearly any local context, meaning that folks have ways to plug in and organize locally, which we know is a really effective model. From choosing where we personally bank or invest our retirement funds to looking at the institutions we're part of, like universities, workplaces, unions, or places of worship, and where those institutions invest their funds, like asset managers, we can be targeting all of those places with divestment and working to move the money away from war. And scaling up from there, we can look at our city's operating budgets, city and state pension funds, and beyond. And there are a lot of ways to plug into this campaign and look under the hood at the institutions in your life and how they might be, most often inadvertently and on accident, not always, but most often, connected to war profiteering and other extractive industries. We have a really powerful toolkit for taking the next steps after when we are targeting those institutions. So why is divestment a winning tactic? Why do we work on this? We find divestment really powerful because it is tangible. It gives us the agency to act no matter if Congress is gridlocked or, as happened yesterday, Biden proposes an $813 billion defense budget. We still have the power to be organizing locally. And I think a lot of activism work, especially in the anti-war world and anti-nuclear world, can feel really demoralizing. But divestment is an especially useful tactic because it concretely allows us to withdraw tangible monetary investments from the arms industry, and to know that, at least on an individual level or on an institutional level like your university or municipality, you are pulling money and power and social capital away from war profiteers. It's also a really powerful tactic because it allows us to build cross-movement coalitions, which highlights the connections between our movements, which is kind of what we're doing today, and which I think we're going to get into a little more in our breakout rooms. Building coalitions, which is just a group of a group or multiple groups, gives us a lot more power and a lot more numbers. And it shows that weapon divestment isn't just something that some fringy anti-war group cares about. When we come together in coalition on a campaign, we show a diversity of support on an issue, from environmental groups to student clubs, faith communities, refugee rights organizations, healthcare advocacy organizations that want money redirected to their causes and beyond. Lastly, divestment is a winning tactic because, contrary to popular opinion, it's not financially risky. In fact, there are multiple studies that have shown that $1 spent on education and healthcare produces more jobs, and in many cases, better paying jobs than the same dollar spent in the defense industry. And I'm going to kick it back to you, Greta.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to this point, which is this common misconception that divestment is financially risky, but in fact, it is very doable. And in 2020, we saw it was a record year for what's called ESG investing, which is environmental social governance investing, essentially investing that is socially and environmentally responsible. And so we're seeing actually that ESG investments are outperforming traditional equity funds, and experts are expecting continued growth. And excitingly, cities are seeing this trend and jumping on board. And in fact, in March of last year, the city of Philadelphia itself passed a resolution which calls on the Philadelphia Pension Board to create an ESG investment policy. This is a screenshot from the press release announcing that policy, the resolution that was passed. And so this ESG investment policy would push the pension board to prioritize investments in sectors that help build a resilient economy and a clean energy system. And so this is really exciting to us that cities are recognizing this, and we hope that we can use Philadelphia's passage of this resolution as a stepping stone towards divestment. Next slide. And that's back to you, Shea.
Thank you. So once you have figured out what institution you are trying to target and move towards ESG investment principles, for example, and away from war, and you've gathered maybe a little crew of people to start, one of the first steps in getting divestment campaigns started is researching investments, which I personally think is really fun, despite how hard it sometimes is, and we'll get into that. So receiving the investment portfolio or investment info from institutions is an essential part of any campaign, and it can sometimes be really simple and sometimes a bit more difficult. Either way, though, it is a really tangible first step to bring folks into the campaign and show that we all of our skills, whether we're more relational people or really good at research, we all have a role to play in figuring out what our communities are invested in. Sometimes you can just look at a website, or you can call a treasurer's office and they'll give you the investment info. On multiple occasions, we've also had to file a Freedom of Information Act, which is a bit more tricky, but ultimately fine. And we do get the info at the end of the day. It's our right to get that. And once we have access to the investments that our local institutions hold, we get to screen them for investments in weapons companies. And the As You Sow Weapon Free Fund is an incredible tool for this step. And I'm going to pass it back to Greta, who's going to talk a little bit about that.
Great. And I know we're running a little bit bit short on time, so I think that we can go a little bit quick on these next slides. So I'll just say, yeah, this is a screenshot of some of the different databases that As You Sow, which is SOW, As You Sow, they offer these different screening devices, these databases. So you can go in there and you can search for funds and you can see how funds are ranked. Are they highly invested in weapons? Are they not invested in weapons? There's a ranking system A through F, and you can see that they do much more than just weapons. So if you're interested in any of these issues, fossil fuels, guns, deforestation, weapons, etc., you can go on their website and use these databases to screen your investments, again, on the personal level or city level or institutional level. Next slide.
Great, thank you. So within this amazing array of different investment screens, CODEPINK has worked together with As You Sow to develop a weapon-free fund, which is linked up here. You can find it at codepink.org/divest. You can also find it at divestfromwarmachine.org. And the weapons companies that it screens for in this investment screen are from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute Arms Industry Database, a really great reputable source. I might skip through this example a little bit quickly, but this is just kind of, it shows you what it looks like when you search a really significant asset manager, Blackrock, in the weapon-free fund. Blackrock is pretty infamous for having a lot of weapons industry investments, also fossil fuel investments. So when you enter their name in the bar up there, it'll show you that they all have high risk for weapons investments. And that's kind of how it shows you that an asset manager that your institution is invested in has some weapons ties. And you can see that each fund page has even more information. You can click on it, it gives you a full breakdown of investments. And you can see that Blackrock alone, in our case, has millions of dollars invested in major military contractors and nuclear weapons, which is particularly concerning. I'm going to pass it back to you, I believe, Greta, if we want to do this slide.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, this is another tool that you can use, and we'll put all of these links in the chat. We'll also share it in the follow-up email, so don't feel like you have to scribble this down really fast. But this is don'tbankonthebomb.com, and they also have a list of financial institutions that invest, particularly with a focus on nuclear weapons here, although you'll see many of the companies do both nuclear weapons and other types of weapons. So you can go to their website and search by different financial institutions. Next slide. And this is just an example of the popular bank, Capital One. It shows a breakdown, and it will give you very specific information in terms of the different companies, General Dynamics, for example. And then if you were to keep scrolling down, you would see the breakdown of how much weapons in each company.
Great. So we are going to take it back to a bit of a local scale. I'm going to talk really quickly about the campaign to divest Chicago from the war machine. And then I'm going to move it over to Greta, who's going to talk about Charlottesville. I myself am based in Chicago, so I get the pleasure of working a lot on the Chicago campaign. Greta plays a really important role holding it down there too. This campaign started up in 2015. A group of folks were really concerned that the citywide pension fund held substantial investments in weapons manufacturers. And after years of research, this was probably the most difficult research phase yet. They received information that the city held funds in asset manager groups that were invested in really major defense corporations. So we knew that there were weapons investments there. We drafted out a city council resolution, and in November of last year, Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, the awesome person in the middle there, introduced our resolution to city council. When it was introduced, it had 9 co-sponsors, the great folks that are listed here, who all helped us dream up what the resolution language should look like. The resolution was referred to the Committee on Finance in January, and we're currently working with different alders across the city to garner more support and schedule a hearing for it. And I would say even more excitingly, or maybe equally exciting, we have had the chance to build some really powerful coalition around this campaign. We are working with groups doing anti-war, environmental, economic justice, educational work, and beyond. Our coalition is currently 12 significant co-sponsoring groups, and we are in the process of growing, which has been great. And I'm going to pass it to you, Greta.
Yeah, another campaign that we wanted to flag is the Divest Charlottesville, Virginia campaign. And this was a successful campaign led by World Beyond War's Executive Director, David Swanson, also in coalition with many, many groups in the Charlottesville area. So this can also be a positive inspiration as we're gathering today and looking to divest Philadelphia, to look at what Charlottesville did. Charlottesville was an interesting case because it was a simultaneous divestment from both weapons and fossil fuels at the same time. time, which helped to build that intersectional type of coalition that Shea was talking about to bring together peace groups and environmental groups. The mechanism for divestment was similar to what we're working on in Philadelphia and in Chicago in terms of using a city council resolution to put the pressure to divest. And the tactics were quite common. They were sort of what you think of when you think of tried and true activist tactics: petitioning, flyering, organizing rallies, tabling at events, speaking to the media, publishing op-eds in local newspapers, speaking at city council meetings. That was a very powerful tactic, to have bunches of people show up and sign up and fill all the slots at the city council meetings and stand up with their signs. And in that way, you can sort of take over a city council meeting, because a lot of people don't show up to those kinds of municipal meetings, so you can make a big splash. And so those were some of the tactics, and we can put the link in the chat so you can go to the website where David has created kind of a guide of how he did what he did and how the coalition came together. And it also has the word for word resolution that was passed, which can be a model for other cities. And we can go to the last slide. This is just to wrap up. Again, we would encourage you to reach out to us and to go to the divestfromwarmachine.org National Coalition website, which has lots of toolkits and resources on all the different things that we've talked about, sample language to pass a resolution in your city, and feel free to reach out to us if you're not in Philadelphia and you want to start a divestment campaign. As you can tell from our presentation, Shea and I provide this kind of remote support to groups across the country and around the world. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you with a campaign and amplify what you're doing.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to end my share.
All right, and with that, we're going to go to the last presentation, which is David Gibson, who is going to present on behalf of the Divest Philly Coalition to give you some insight onto what we're doing locally. So David, I'll start sharing the slides.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Sound good? Okay.
Yes.
Using my new multi-directional microphone I bought for these kinds of things. So I'm very proud of that. So thank you everybody for showing up. It's really great to see people here. We've got over 50 participants. That's very exciting. So check out, you all can see the slide there. Keep loving Philly, make it weapons free. The logo says, this is Divest from the War Machine. And from our perspective, this is a first step in making Philadelphia even a more peaceful city. We have a lot of work to do on that on many fronts, but we're starting with the nuclear weapons issue because we have some pretty large investments in nuclear weapons. Next slide. And we'll take the next slide, please. There you go. So we have 5 investment firms that manage the pension board's assets. So we're talking about the Philadelphia Pension Board. They're invested in, these 5 investment firms are invested in nukes to the tune of $11 billion. Strategic Income Management, Lord Abbott High Yield, Viera Capital, Ariel Capital Holdings, and Northern Trust. Now, that's a lot of money, and we think it can be spent in better ways. Next slide, please. I feel a little bit like Dr. Fauci here. So what our resolution actually asks is that what I should say we're asking the pension board to do is put a screen on its investments. That's instructing its asset managers to exclude the top nuclear producers from their investment portfolios. So as you can see on this slide, there's quite a few of them there. You might recognize some of them, particularly in our area. Lockheed Martin should be on that list someplace. Yep, there it is on the 3rd line. Thanks. And there are people here who are working pretty hard to expose Lockheed Martin's, bad investments in nuclear weapons and other things. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So what we did to start with is play off of these 3 resolutions that have already passed. We talked about the one on the nuclear ban treaty earlier, but there's also been, and also the one on the ESG that Greta mentioned, but we also have 2 resolutions from City Council have divested from investments in prisons, companies that invest in prisons, and also gun manufacturers. So this has been done before. There's no reason why we can't do it for nuclear weapons as well. So our first step was to go directly to the pension board themselves and request a meeting. And there were several attempts to do that. We finally got a chance to talk to the staff coordinator or the staff person for the pension board. And he pretty much made it clear to us that by law, his job was to encourage them to invest in the most profitable investments possible, and that he was not able to recommend the meeting to us because it would, in his position, he felt it was going against the law and he'd be at risk. So our next step was to go around that, because it turns out that in Philadelphia, the city can direct the pension board what to do. So our next target was city council. Next slide, please. So passing a city council resolution. We've done a first draft already. You can check that out there at that, what do you call it, that link. We've already started meeting with council members sort of privately. We've had meetings with 3 different council members right now. And right now, Councilman Green has been sort of talking with the pension board to get a sense of what the actual financial effects of passing a resolution like this would be. Now, I've been in contact with them this week. I talked to his investment staff person who sort of handles this stuff, and they're supposed to get back to us this week on where that resolution's at, whether they want to tweak the language at all. And we've told them that we are ready to start shopping this around. It's pretty important that we move forward on this. So we've also let them know that we've already been in communication with other counselors, and that we've got to start getting a group of counselors together to sort of count our ducks, make sure they're all in a row, and make sure that we can get this resolution passed through city council. At this point, it's getting to be where we're at a sort of typical lobby campaign, right? And we all know how to do that. We've all done lobbying before. So as soon as we hear back from Green's office and figure out where they're at on this, it's going to be bringing this resolution in its final form out to other counselors that we feel could be allies, and start putting the pressure on. We've got a petition for that. We've got, sort of letter writing campaigns. Thank you. This is the petition. It kind of looks like that. It's an online petition. And that at the bottom, you can see there another link. I'm assuming somebody's putting those links in the chat. Good. And if not, we can make them available to you. Everybody who signs on to this petition, it goes to the pension board itself, right? Is that correct, Greta?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, so we may have a petition to city council at some point once we get the actual resolution rolling. So that's pretty much it. I want to kind of end early because we're already running behind schedule a little bit, and we'll get into more of the details and questions when we get into the breakout rooms and that sort of thing. So that's it. Thank you for paying attention, and we'll get on to the next step now.
Mhm. Yay. So now we have time for question and answers. So you may raise your hand using the reaction button at the bottom of your screen, or you may raise your hand by waving it at me. I might not see it as well because we've got, we still have 3 screens of people, and you can type it in capital letters into your, into the chat. And so I see Jeffrey Barkdahl. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, and you are first to ask a question. Thanks, Jeffrey.
I want to be able to, I want to make a special announcement. Will you let me do that?
So we do have a time for announcements at the end. Is that okay? But I don't see any questions. So
Yeah. I mean, and
I
trust
assume
me,
your
you're gonna-
announcement applies to this.
Yes, and I think you're gonna love the idea. that
Okay, go for it.
post. When that time, if the breakout room, I'd like to have Greta in that breakout room.
So you can go ahead and make your announcement, Jeffrey.
Well, no, I was gonna say during the breakout room, then or do you want me to make it now?
You can make it now.
Okay. had an idea. I have a special idea that can help with this cause. It can help if I just need to start a campaign, then have a gain movement, which if successful, can get the TPNW signed and help divest away from nuclear weapons. It's a UN observance day I came up with called International Radiation Awareness Day. The purpose of it is the day's purpose is to raise awareness about the negative effects of radiation in every way, shape, and form, which will help promote anti-nuclear organizations, not just anti-nuclear organizations, not just in the United States, but worldwide too. I'm going to put the link to the website that I created. It's a Facebook page if you want to see it.
Okay, thank you.
So Greta, I would like to hear from Greta too about what she thinks of it.
So, and Greta also mentioned, she put it in the chat, if you can send an email, if you are interested in the PowerPoint slides, you can send an email to to her at the Disarm link email and tell her how you would use them, and she will be able to take it from there. So yes, your message is in the chat, Jeffrey. It also looks like there is a question from Bonita, but it didn't finish. Have you considered coordinating? Bonita, would you like to unmute yourself and finish that sentence? And then I have one other question after that.
What? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was going with my phone and the computer at the same time. I'm involved with quite a few organizations, most of them environmentally oriented. I do the local Facebook page, for example, for CCL, which is a citizens climate lobby, and an activist card that includes organizations like Sierra Club. And I am in bright red, Florida County, Florida, but unbelievably, Sierra Club and their campaign for the 100 initiative has had some great success, and that Sarasota County signed, or the Sarasota City signed on to Ready for 100, as did I think St. Pete and some other local places in this really unbelievable environment here. Yeah, the environment is a very important aspect of why people want to live in Florida. It is our economy. Wait a minute, am I still with you?
Yes, you're with us. We hear you, and we need to wrap up and get ready for our breakout room soon. But
okay, what I was suggesting is that coordinating with some of these groups that have already had success at a local and county level is a win-win for everyone. And the coalition, I started to type out an alphabetized list from all the people that I get emails from, some organizations, and without a healthy, the rest of them matter to anything. But if you could coattail on some of these effective initiatives that are already in place. I mean, we have celebrated, what are we going on, 2 or 3 years now with the Ready for 100 and pushing for awareness, and making that connect with these organizations can be a, it can be a win-win for everybody.
yes, thank you.
And the Citizens Climate Lobby meets on the second Saturday of the month, every month. We do a national meeting. We did Zoom before anybody ever heard of Zoom before the pandemic. We were doing Zoom meetings that included not only people like Al Gore, but people that were literally Catherine Hayhoe and some leading scientists all over the world. The convention involves something like 36 countries. And then we break out into a local group that might be 12 to 20 people to adapt those initiatives to a local level. So I invite people, if you're not on CCL, you don't really have to be a paying member to attend. It's like 1 o'clock on Saturdays, the second Saturday of the month. to go to ccl.org or go to the Sarasota County or Sarasota Manatee.
Thank you. Thanks, Benita. Yes, we and there's a CCL here in the Philadelphia area too, a couple of branches. So that's wonderful. Thank you for making that connection. That's what today is all about, building on our successes and making connections.
And I don't touch the rest, but thank you for catching that.
Well, really, as a coalition working in the time of pandemic or not, one of the themes is building on our successes. And to do that, we have to do it ourselves because we don't get the media attention, right? We don't hear about TPNW in our newspapers. So knowing each other is one way to facilitate that process. So we are excited that this webinar is going to include a little bit of time, not enough, but a little bit of time for us to break out into rooms. I'm gonna put our little questions in the chat. Once the breakout rooms, if you can stick around with us, we'd ask you to share your name, where you're from, and then maybe how you'd like to get involved. That might be locally or that might be nationally or internationally. And I believe Greta will verify with me, but I believe that we have 6 breakout rooms. A couple other questions that were in the chat, and that is that yes, our follow-up email will include the links. And let's see, Greta, what else do I need to say while you're, I think that
maybe just I'm getting the breakout room set up right now, so maybe just go over the questions that people will discuss.
So the questions are your name, the group you're affiliated with, if any, and any what you envision, what you're willing to work for. And then having heard today's presentations, how can you get involved? That might be locally, or it might be nationally or internationally on abolishing nuclear weapons. So it's real simple.
It's gonna be hard for me to remember all that.
But you know what? I put it in the chat. Okay, Jeffrey? It's in the chat. And there will be a breakout room leader from Divest Philly. So they will have those written down as well. And so they will help you remember. And our next, we'll have, remind me how many minutes, Greta, so we can tell people.
20 minutes. 20
minutes in the breakout rooms. And if for some, I know that sometimes people have to leave. If you do have to leave before at the end, after the breakout rooms, we'll have some announcements. We have to leave. We thank you so much for being here. You will receive an email from us, and we're thrilled for the chance to talk about how we are successfully moving towards getting rid of nuclear weapons.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. I'm going to open the rooms right now, and you all should then get a button that will ask you to join your room. So here we go.